A bus pulls away from a country road on a cold December evening. A 17-year-old girl steps off, turns toward home. The distance ahead is measured not in miles, but in minutes, a few hundred yards. Less than a quarter of a mile. She never arrived. 32 days later, her body was found in a woodland, frozen solid in weather that should never have frozen her. And the question that would haunt investigators for the next 60 years was not just who killed her, but where had she been kept? Welcome back to Old Casebook, where we cover the cases that time hasn't closed. If you're new here, subscribe, because we bring you a real unsolved or cold case every single week. Today's case takes us to rural England in 1957, and it is one of the strangest, most disturbing cold cases in British criminal history. Let's get into it. Anne Noblett was 17 years old, a student at Watford Technical College, balancing college life, family, and ordinary social activities in the rural Hertfordshire community of Marshall's Heath. Her father, Thomas, managed a local company in Wheathampstead. The family was rooted in the area, and Anne's journey home that evening was not an unfamiliar route into unknown territory. It was the walk she had taken many times before. Monday, December the 30th, 1957. Anne had spent part of the day in Harpenden, attending a dance class or gathering at Lord's Hall. By early evening, she was making the familiar journey home. Later reconstruction state she boarded the 391 Green Line bus after missing her usual service. She travelled back toward Marshall's Heath and stepped off near the cherry trees at approximately 6 o'clock. Some accounts give the time as 6:03 in the evening. A young woman named Shirley Edwards is identified in later case reports as the last known person to see Anne alive. She saw her after they both stepped off the bus. From that point, Anne had only a few hundred yards left, less than a quarter of a mile, the kind of distance you cover in minutes without thinking. No confirmed witness saw Anne being forced into a vehicle. No reliable account records a cry for help. There was no visible disturbance on the road, no clear sign of where her route ended. Only one detail stood out. An area resident who later recalled seeing the rear lights of a car further along the lane around that same time. It could have been ordinary traffic, but investigators had no way to dismiss it. When Anne failed to arrive home, her family's concern became alarm quickly. Police were notified. Searches began across the nearby countryside, fields, paths, hedges, ditches, wooded ground. Police dogs were deployed. The first searches found nothing, no sign of Anne, no indication of a struggle, no clue pointing toward where she had gone or how she had vanished from a route so short it should have taken minutes to walk. Appeals appeared in the press. Police sought information from residents and motorists who had been in the area on the evening of December 30th. The possibility that Anne had run away was considered, but no publicly known evidence supported it. She had not announced any intention to leave. Investigators found no destination that explained her disappearance. By the end of January, Anne had been missing for more than 4 weeks. Police were scaling back the large-scale search. Public appeals had generated no solution. The case appeared to be moving toward a prolonged, unanswered disappearance. Then everything changed. Friday, January 31st, 1958. Brothers Hugh and Brian Simons were walking their dog, Rip, in Rose Grove Wood, near Whitwell. Hugh was a leading aircraft man with the Royal Air Force. Brian was 14 years old. During the walk, the dog drew their attention deeper into the woodland. There, several miles from Marshall's Heath, the brothers found the body of Anne Noblett. She was found fully clothed in the undergrowth. Her glasses were still on her face. Her personal belongings were nearby. The location was well into the woodland, not beside the road, not somewhere a body might land accidentally. Whoever had placed her there had carried her in. But it was the condition of her remains that changed everything. Anne's body was frozen. The weather around the time of discovery had been relatively mild. There was no natural explanation for the state of her preservation. The newspapers gave the case a name that would never leave it: the deep freeze murder. The post-mortem examination, associated with Home Office pathologist Dr. Francis Camps, confirmed that Anne had been strangled and subjected to sexual violence. Evidence also suggested she had been undressed and then redressed. Details including incorrectly fastened clothing were cited in later reports as indicators of what had occurred. Her death was a homicide, not an accident, not a voluntary disappearance. But Dr. Camps went further. He supported the conclusion that Anne's body had been refrigerated or frozen before being placed in Rose Grove Wood. Investigators then examined the vegetation beneath and around her. Plant growth differences reportedly suggested she had not been lying in that woodland throughout the entire 32 days since her disappearance. Some reports indicate she may have been placed there as few as 2 weeks before she was found. That finding created the darkest question in the entire case. If Anne had not been in Rose Grove Wood the whole time, then someone had kept her body somewhere else, concealed, refrigerated, while police, volunteers, reporters, and her own family continued searching, while her parents waited for news. Someone had held on to what they had done and stayed silent. In 1957, a freezer large enough to contain a human body was far less common in a private home than it would later become. Police turned their attention to commercial refrigeration, farms, factories, storage facilities, and outbuildings across the region. The investigation was led by Detective Chief Superintendent Robert Elwell of the Hertfordshire Criminal Investigation Department and Detective Superintendent Richard Lewis of Scotland Yard's Murder Squad. Later summaries state that facilities within approximately 30 miles were examined and that around 2,000 people were questioned. That enormous effort failed to identify where Anne may have been kept. No freezer was publicly linked to her through decisive physical evidence. No employee or property owner was ever charged with storing her body. The theory had generated a vast field of possible locations, but the time between her disappearance and her discovery had given the offender a critical window. Whoever was responsible had the opportunity to clean, move, or destroy evidence before police even understood what they were looking for. Investigators had to consider several possibilities about who could have done this. The most likely explanation was someone Anne knew or trusted enough to approach without resisting. A local person could have offered her a lift on a cold winter evening, with home only a short distance away. A familiar face, a plausible reason. Anne steps toward the vehicle, and within moments, she is gone. A local offender would also have known the area, secluded buildings suitable for concealment, refrigeration facilities, and the approaches to Rose Grove Wood. That local knowledge might explain how a body was hidden for weeks without detection. A stranger remained possible too, a driver who stopped at the right moment, or who had been watching Anne, or knew her routine. But the level of planning required to conceal a body for weeks suggested someone with access to resources and a location, not someone acting entirely on impulse. Another theory was that the encounter was never intended to end in murder. Anne may have entered a vehicle or building voluntarily before an assault occurred. Her death could then have forced the offender into a desperate, prolonged effort to conceal what had happened, which would explain why her body was kept and later moved, rather than simply abandoned. None of these theories was ever publicly proven. No confession emerged, no forensic link connected any individual to the crime. In April 1959, two men were questioned for many hours following an early morning police operation in Southam. The questioning was connected to Anne's case and a separate investigation. Both men were released. No charges followed. Decades later, the refrigeration question still generated tips from the public. A report published in 2021 described a woman who recalled a man in the Wheat Hampstead area who had possessed a large freezer during the 1950s. Police historians passed the information to cold case investigators, but the person had reportedly already been considered and eliminated years earlier. The tip showed something important. Even after more than 60 years, the case had never left the community. People still remembered it. People were still thinking about it. But memory alone could not replace evidence. In December 2017, Hertfordshire detectives renewed their public appeal, marking 60 years since Anne vanished. They asked anyone with information to come forward, including people who may have remained silent because of fear, loyalty, or uncertainty about what they had seen. Reports connected with that review indicated that little or no usable physical evidence remained for modern forensic testing. DNA profiling can transform old investigations, but only when preserved material survives. No one has ever been convicted of killing Anne Noblet. No publicly identified suspect has been proven responsible. No accepted account explains where her body was kept before it appeared in Rosegrove Wood. Anne is buried in St. Helens Churchyard in Wheat Hampstead. The memorial records her death on December 30th, 1957, and her age as 17. Her father Thomas was later buried beside her. The inscription contains no reference to the investigation that consumed thousands of police hours. No reference to the name the newspapers gave the crime. It records only a daughter whose life ended before the new year began. The deep freeze murder is remembered because of its extraordinary forensic mystery. But the cold storage theory should never overshadow the person at the center of it. Anne Noblet was a 17-year-old college student returning from a dance during the Christmas season. Her family expected her home that evening. For 32 days, they lived without knowing where she was. The discovery in Rosegrove Wood ended that uncertainty in the cruelest possible way, while leaving every larger question unanswered. Someone knew how Anne left that lane. Someone may have known where she was concealed, how she died, and why her body was moved. That knowledge could have belonged to one person or been shared by others who chose silence. With each passing decade, the number of living witnesses has grown smaller. But the central question has never changed. A bus stopped near Marshall's Heath shortly after 6 o'clock on a winter evening in 1957. Anne stepped down and began the final part of her journey home. She was close enough that nobody could have imagined the distance would become permanent. What happened in the next few minutes remains unknown. And until that missing interval is explained, the murder of Anne Noblet remains frozen in time. If you have any information about the murder of Anne Noblet, Hertfordshire police are still asking for the public's help. And if this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Subscribe to Old Casebook for a new real case every week, because some stories have been waiting decades for someone to finally speak.